In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on March 10th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Baylor versus Arizona State. This matchup feels like that slightly awkward Big 12 tournament showdown where both teams walk in at 16-15, glance across the floor, and realize someone's year is about to be judged by a couple of intense hours of basketball. Baylor comes in feeling pretty good about itself after that 101-75 beatdown of Utah, a game where the offense actually looked relaxed for once, flowing into shots, sharing the ball, and knocking down over 60% from the field while living at almost 87% on free throws. Those kinds of nights are not just about numbers, they are about rhythm, about a group that suddenly looks like it trusts what it is running and is happy to turn defense into easy offense instead of grinding every possession into dust. Arizona State, on the other side, is walking into this thing with a very different taste in its mouth after getting handled 86-65 by Iowa State, turning the ball over 22 times and getting pushed around on the glass. That sort of game sticks with you because it is not just a loss, it is a reminder that if you are loose with the ball or slow to react, a physical opponent can make you look a step behind all night. Honestly, when a team has that kind of outing right before a neutral floor game, it can either sharpen them or rattle them, and figuring out which way they lean is a big part of the puzzle. Across the season, Baylor's identity looks clearer and a little more reliable. They average around 82.7 points per game on roughly 48% shooting, and they sit in that top tier of offensive efficiency that analytics people love to circle when they build models. Arizona State is more of a mid to high 70s scoring team, living around 44-45% from the floor, with an efficiency profile that feels much more middle of the pack than scary. Here is the thing, both teams have slogged through a brutal Big 12 slate, so it is not like one schedule is soft, yet Baylor still manages to come out with the stronger offensive indicators when you zoom out. There is also the comfort of familiarity. We have already seen this exact pairing once, with Baylor taking a 73-68 win in Waco back in February, covering a much bigger number at home while never really letting the game slip out of their control. That first meeting felt like Baylor had the sturdier backbone, even if the final score did not spin into a complete blowout. Now the conversation shifts to a neutral floor where the expectation from the market is only that Baylor wins by a small handful of possessions, and the offense looks like it is trending in the right direction while analytical models and handicapping previews tilt in their direction. Injury-wise, public reports frame Baylor as dealing with long-term hits in the front court, while Arizona State lists a deeper collection of rotation pieces as out or questionable, which quietly matters once whistles start flying. Foul trouble, especially in a high-pressure tournament setting, can expose those cracks fast, and the team that already leans on the more polished offense is usually better equipped to survive the weird swings. It is not that Arizona State cannot punch back, they absolutely can, but when you combine the better scoring profile, the recent head-to-head win, the more convincing current form, and a spread that has actually tightened from the hefty home number in February to a more modest expectation on a neutral court, one side carries a more stable story. As our first pick for this matchup, the Baylor Bears to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Season long, both of these teams have lived in a world that odds makers love when they are hanging big totals, with Baylor putting up roughly 82-83 points a night and allowing around 77, while Arizona State sits near 77 scored and 78 allowed. That kind of profile screams high tempo, plenty of possessions, and a style that usually drags bettors toward expecting firework shows. Let me explain. When both offenses and defenses sit in those ranges, the first instinct is to assume the track meet version of the game will show up again. The previous meeting between these two did not exactly follow that script. That February contest finished at 73-68, only 141 total points, and that was in Baylor's own gym where you would expect the favorite to feel more comfortable pushing the pace. So you have this weird tension between what the season averages suggest and what the actual head-to-head gave us, and that tension is where a lot of value often hides. Conference tournament games on neutral floors, especially those earlier tip times where teams are still getting used to the arena sightlines and the feel of the court, often slide into a more methodical rhythm. Coaches shorten rotations, possessions get a little more precious, and you see more half-court sets with everyone double-checking where they should be instead of constantly running in transition. That is not a hard rule, and it is fair to admit it is a bit speculative, but it matches what you often see when tired legs, unfamiliar rims, and higher stakes all collide in the same building. Current injury reports add another layer to the idea of a slightly slower, more controlled game. Both sides are missing pieces, with Baylor thinner in the front court and Arizona State managing absences across the rotation, which naturally nudges coaches toward protecting key players and easing off full-speed chaos for all 40 minutes. When depth is not a luxury, it is harder to play reckless, and that alone can shave a few possessions off a game that looks wild on paper. So while the season-long numbers absolutely explain why the bookmakers have set a high expectation for points, the specific matchup, the way the earlier meeting actually played out, the neutral site tournament setting, the early tip atmosphere, and the slight downward movement in the total collectively make a lower-scoring storyline feel more believable than the raw averages suggest. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. SMU versus Syracuse. Tournament basketball on a neutral floor has a way of stripping the excuses out of a matchup like this. SMU walks in as the group with the cleaner resume at 19-12, while Syracuse shows up at 15-16, a little wobbly but still dangerous enough to make people nervous. That first meeting that finished 79-78 felt like a reminder that these two can push each other right to the edge, with Syracuse getting the last little bounce at home and SMU walking out feeling like it had let one slip. Take away the home crowd, the friendly rims, the comfort of a familiar routine, and it turns into a question of who has a style that survives when you are living out of a hotel and shooting in a pro arena with every sound echoing a bit more than usual. SMU has leaned into a clear identity all season, playing like a team that trusts its offense to carry the conversation, piling up around 85 points a night on about 49% from the field and close to 38% from deep, and still winning the overall math battle by outscoring opponents by roughly 6.5 points per game. Syracuse tends to live a little closer to the coin flip, scoring around 75, giving up roughly 74, and finding itself in a lot of games that feel like they come down to 2 or 3 possessions in a late loose ball. There is something charming about that chaos, but it is a tough way to live when the season is on the line and you are the one catching points. The free throw issue only sharpens that edge, because a team hovering in the mid-60s at the stripe, after sitting under 57% earlier in the year, has to sweat every whistle, especially when it is supposed to keep things close rather than close things out. SMU is not pretending to be old-school lockdown on the defensive end, and anyone who has watched them knows they give up their share, but the combination of a reliable scoring engine, a steady efficiency edge, and even the power rating models that quietly nudge this toward a bigger margin than the market suggests all tilt the trust scale one way when you zoom out from that 1-point loss in the Dome and look at the full 5-month picture. As our first pick for this matchup, the SMU Mustangs to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. SMU games have turned into track meets more often than not, with those 85 points per night matched by allowing around 78, which pushes their typical combined total into the low 160s without needing any wild shooting heaters. Their defense is basically an invitation to play, giving up roughly 43.5% from the field and about 34% from 3, so possessions do not feel like a grind, they feel like a race. When that style meets Syracuse, which averages in the mid-70s on offense and gives up just under 74, you get a blend that rarely feels sleepy. That California result, 107-100, is kind of the extreme version of who Syracuse can be when things open up, a team that gets into full court mode and suddenly your box score looks like an NBA game. The earlier meeting that ended 79-78 already showed how a game between these two can quietly climb, even without some absurd shooting outlier, and that was in a building that one side knows like a second home. You add in a neutral floor tournament setting where nerves often turn into quick shots, long rebounds, and extra possessions, and the ingredients for another high-tempo script are all right there. Syracuse has that weird mix of shaky half-court execution and rough free-throw history that actually stretches games, with missed front ends, extra fouls, and long rebound runouts that send both ways. SMU is more than happy to live in the 70s and 80s, sometimes flirting with 90 or more as seen in those recent outbursts against Louisville and Boston College, and Syracuse has already proven it can be dragged into that kind of rhythm by the right opponent. So while there is always the chance that everybody tightens up and shots stop falling, the more honest read on who these teams have been this season points toward a matchup where pace, whistles, and shot-making stay front and center from the opening tip to the final horn. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Wake Forest versus Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech and Wake Forest meeting for a third time feels less like a new matchup and more like a check on which version of each team is real. The first clash went Wake Forest's way in Winston-Salem in a tight one. Then Virginia Tech came home and flipped that script completely with that 20-point type of beatdown, 82-63 in Blacksburg. Put those two together and the Hokies sit with a comfortable positive margin over the two games, which quietly tells you quite a bit about who has handled the matchup better over a full 80 minutes. Over the full season, Virginia Tech has settled into a profile that looks balanced and pretty stable, scoring in the high 70s on average while giving up something closer to the low 70s. That kind of split fits a top 120 level offense paired with a defense that, while not elite, holds up better than what Wake Forest has shown. Wake carries a reputation as an entertaining team to watch, plenty of shot making, but their defensive efficiency has slipped down toward that soft middle tier where opponents get a lot of comfort. Honestly, that is where the game starts to tilt, not in a single highlight, but in how often you trust one defense to string together stops compared with the other. Both sides can stroke it from deep and most fans know that part already, but the way Virginia Tech combines that offense with perimeter resistance is what stands out here. The Hokies sit around the mid-30s from three, and more importantly, they have held opponents closer to the low 30s from beyond the arc, which is a painful place to live for a team that leans on jumpers the way Wake does. Wake's coverage on the perimeter feels more forgiving, and the interior has had its rough nights, like that larger stage game where Duke just kept hammering the paint until it broke. In March, when teams are playing in a neutral building rather than a cozy home gym, that kind of defensive gap tends to feel even bigger because the easy looks do not magically appear for both sides. Here is the thing, neutral site tournament games usually reward the group that can create clean looks without giving the ball away, especially when emotions are high and possessions suddenly feel heavier. Virginia Tech has held a small but meaningful edge in assist-to-turnover ratio and overall shot quality this season, and they bring a deeper mix of shooters and size that already showed its teeth in that February meeting. Wake Forest can look like the better team for a 4 or 5 minute stretch, then suddenly the defense disappears and the whole game tilts the other way, which is exciting for viewers and terrifying for bettors. The number from the sportsbook is sitting in that classic 1 or 2 possession window where late-game composure, free throws, and basic half-court execution usually decide everything. So the team with the steadier defense, the better recent history in this specific matchup, and the more balanced efficiency profile is the one that makes the most sense to trust here. As our first pick for this matchup, the Virginia Tech Hokies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Both teams have played seasons where points pile up, not in some frantic track meet, but through steady, efficient offense on both sides of the floor. Virginia Tech games have averaged totals in the low 150s, while Wake Forest contests have pushed things a little higher into the mid-150s, so the typical night for either team already lives in a higher scoring neighborhood. The two head-to-head meetings fit that story almost perfectly, landing once in the high 150s and once in the mid-140s, which averages out right in that same low 150s lane that oddsmakers like to use for games featuring good offenses and imperfect defenses. Stylistically, neither team is racing the ball up the floor on every trip, but both run modern spacing, plenty of shooting, and a clear goal of creating threes and free throws rather than long, grinding possessions. Together, they have been willing to fire around 50 threes per game and reach the line roughly 40 times on an average night, and both sides hit their free throws in that mid-70s range that coaches can live with. You do not need wild end-to-end chaos for a total to climb when the possessions that you do get are filled with decent looks from deep and consistent trips to the stripe. In a tournament setting, whistles can come a little faster, contact gets called a bit more, and that quietly turns every drive to the rim into another chance for easy points with the clock stopped. This kind of bracket game is also a lose-and-go-home situation, which changes late-game behavior in a way that leans toward more scoring, not less. Coaches will trade timeouts for set plays, shooters will be given the green light on semi-contested looks they might pass up in January, and if the score is even remotely close in the last 2 minutes, you get the familiar sequence of intentional fouls and pressure possessions. Anyone who has sweated a ticket in March knows that a game sitting in the 140s can suddenly jump 10 points in the last 40 seconds once the parade to the free throw line begins. When you match that script with 2 offenses ranked in that top 120 range, one defense that is average and another that routinely leaks, and a season series that has already played in that general scoring band, it feels far more natural to lean with the shotmakers rather than pin everything on 40 minutes of defensive discipline. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. BYU versus Kansas State. This matchup feels like one of those March pairings where one team has spent the whole season quietly building a solid resume while the other has mostly been fighting fires. BYU walks in at 21-10 overall and 9-9 in Big 12 play, which tells you they have handled a brutal league without falling apart. Kansas State, sitting at 12-19 with a 3-15 conference mark, has lived on the opposite end of that experience, more survival mode than statement wins. That alone does not cash a ticket, but it does frame the basic tug of war here, the steadier group with a clear identity facing a side that has been searching for one for months. BYU has leaned on an attack that hums, averaging around 84 points per game, which puts them in the national conversation for scoring and offensive efficiency, and you can see it in how freely they move the ball and space the floor. Defensively, they are more middle of the pack, which actually matters for the side because it means they are used to winning by outscoring people rather than clamping games into rock fights. On the other side, Kansas State scores respectably, living around the high 70s, but gives up over 80 points a night, and that leaky profile has turned a lot of their games into track meets where they are the ones chasing. Honestly, when you watch a team that habitually struggles to string together 3 or 4 clean defensive trips, especially against a high-confidence offense, you start to picture stretches where the favorite stacks long runs just by doing what it already does well. Layer on the coaching storyline and it gets even more interesting because Kansas State made a mid-season change and is now riding with an interim staff trying to stabilize things, while BYU has continuity on the bench and a system that has already shown it works against high-level competition. That kind of contrast shows up in the small details, the after timeout sets, the way rotations stay coherent when foul trouble hits, the way a team responds when the other side hits back with a big run. It is not that Kansas State cannot punch, they can, but their margin for error has been thin all year, and that is usually a rough place to be when you are facing a polished offense that can punish every lapse. Put all of that together, and you get a picture where the more reliable scoring engine, the more stable coaching setup, and the season-long numbers all tilt in the same direction regarding who is more likely to finish on the right side of the spread. As our first pick for this matchup, the BYU Cougars to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. BYU already plays with a natural offensive rhythm, pushing the pace when the window is there and flowing into half-court actions that generate clean threes and driving lanes, which is how you end up in the mid-80s on the scoreboard on an average night. Kansas State brings its own offense to the party, living around 79 points per game, but the real tell for the total is that they allow even more than they score, which is a polite way of saying their games tend to be messy, open, and high possession. Put that against a BYU defense that is decent but not suffocating, and you get the kind of recipe where both sides can find rhythm, where missed shots are often followed by quick runouts instead of grinded-out half-court resets. March settings also have a way of nudging totals upward, with nerves on closeouts, a little extra adrenaline on fast breaks, and coaches more willing to ride their offensive strengths rather than suddenly reinvent who they are for one night. Add the possibility of extended late-game fouling if the margin hovers in that uncomfortable zone, plus the modern 3-heavy style both programs are comfortable with, and you get more little pathways that lean toward a scoreline that keeps climbing. It is funny, because both teams know they should guard better, everyone always says that, yet the season-long evidence has been clear. Their clearest route to hanging around in games has been to keep the scoreboard moving, not to slam the brakes. With two offenses that can fill it up, two defenses that have shown plenty of cracks, and a modern, pace-friendly style on both benches, the most natural expectation is still a game that plays toward a higher-scoring script rather than a low-scoring slog. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Oklahoma State versus Colorado, neutral court, March tournament vibes, and two Big 12 teams that already know each other make this feel more like a rematch in a series than a one-off game. Oklahoma State arrives as the 14 seed at 18-13-0. Colorado comes in as the 11 seed at 17-14-0. And the gap between those labels feels smaller than the bracket suggests. They met in Boulder not long ago, and that night told a pretty clear story. Colorado leaned into control, Oklahoma State leaned into chaos, and the final looked like it, an 83-69 result where the Cowboys never really grabbed rhythm, shot poorly from the field, and turned the ball over more than they moved it. Oklahoma State wants this kind of game to feel like a pickup run, fast, loose, and full of trips to the free throw line. Their own notes celebrate that identity, mid-80s in points per game, a bunch of nights cracking 90, and a defense that loves to trade stops for tempo. It is exciting, and it is also the kind of style that can look amazing at home with the crowd buzzing, then suddenly fragile when the court is neutral, the rims feel unfamiliar, and the whistle gets a little stingier. On a night where the officials are not handing out free throws like samples at Costco, a team that leans on the stripe can suddenly feel ordinary. Colorado, on the other hand, is much happier when things slow down enough for the half court to matter. They still score. They are not some grind-it-to-a-halt group, but they like structure, spacing, and shared decision-making more than a pure track meet. And you could see that in the previous meeting, they nudged Oklahoma State out of its comfort zone, turned that speed into rushed shots instead of clean looks, and quietly dictated which possessions actually counted. On a neutral floor in Kansas City, that same personality plays nicely. The Buffaloes do not need noise to execute. They just need a decent floor and time to run their sets. The injury picture leans into this angle too. Colorado is likely missing Sebastian Rancic, with John Monty and Leonardo Van Elswyk still parked on season-long red shirts, so they are not exactly swimming in bodies, but they have lived with that reality and built around it. Oklahoma State is dealing with their own issues. Parsafala out with a knee problem and Robert Jennings II sidelined by a hip issue, which chips away at their front court depth and makes it a little harder to win the physical battle possession after possession. In a game where a single empty stretch can swing everything, the team that has already proved it can steer the tempo, survive some whistles, and win without perfect shooting starts to feel slightly more trustworthy. Here is the thing, this is still a small number game. One or two possessions can flip the ticket from happy to frustrated. But if you ask which side has the more repeatable path on a neutral floor, the answer leans toward the group that already showed it can drag the opponent away from its favorite style, keep its poise, and stack enough stops to let its half-court offense breathe. As our first pick for this matchup, the Colorado Buffaloes to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Oklahoma State has spent the season playing like that friend who presses turbo in NBA 2K and never lets go. They race the ball up, take early shots, and live with whatever comes back the other way. Mid-80s on the scoreboard, low 80s allowed, a pile of games punching into the 90s. It is not subtle. You see it in those recent scores, 91-84 against West Virginia, 91-68 at Cincinnati, that wild 111-104 overtime circus at UCF. The pattern is simple. When the Cowboys are involved, the scoreboard operator does not sit down much. Colorado is not some slow-motion counterweight either. Their season trends sit just under 80 points per game scored, high 70s allowed, with plenty of nights where the offense does most of the talking. There are those shootout-style results, 102-97 in overtime against Eastern Washington, 95-89 over BYU, 92-78 at Utah. They have also been on the receiving end of some real blasts, 102-62 at Houston, 97-78 at Colorado State, which quietly reinforces the idea that their games rarely die quietly on the scoreboard. Now, there is a little contradiction built into this. The first meeting between these two landed at 83-69, which, by their standards, feels almost modest. Colorado forced 15 turnovers, bothered Oklahoma State into rough shooting, and turned a fast team into a frustrated one. That is the blueprint for a lower scoring outcome. More empty trips, fewer clean transition chances, more half-court grinding. So if someone argues that this matchup can stay under a big number because we have already seen one calmer version, they are not crazy. Let me explain why the scale still tilts toward fireworks. Tournament basketball has a funny way of inflating the last 5 minutes of games like this. Teams that are down start firing quicker threes, they stretch possessions, they foul, they extend the clock, and the final few minutes can look like a different sport compared to the first 35. When you pair that typical late-game script with two teams that already live in the fast lane, one that loves to push and one that is perfectly comfortable trading bucket for bucket, the odds of a quiet finish drop a bit. Even if the start is a little tight, nerves, new sightlines, all that, once players settle in and the whistle starts feeding free throws to both sides, the kind of scoring jumps we have seen all season start to feel familiar again. So, yes, a total this high always carries some nerves. You need both teams to show up. You need the pace to stick. You need the shot making to be decent. But with these two specific profiles, constant tempo from Oklahoma State, steady offensive punch from Colorado, and a postseason setting that usually rewards aggression, the expectation still leans toward a game where the scoreboard keeps being tested from opening tip to the final horn. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.